The village of Maybe, Michigan covers only a small patch of land, quiet roads, scattered homes, and fields that seem to stretch longer than the town itself. Fewer than 600 people lived there in 2014, and most days moved at the same steady pace. It was the kind of place where family names carried history, where farms shaped routine, and where a young woman like Chelsea Bruck could still imagine a big future growing out of a small town. Chelsea was 22 years old and living with her family on their 160-acre farm. She was the youngest of 5, one of the Bruck girls, and the people closest to her knew exactly how she worked. She could be shy at first, the kind of person who watched a room before stepping fully into it. Then the humor would come out. The smile would stay. She liked to joke, liked to laugh, liked to make other people feel lighter. She worked as a hostess at Olga's Kitchen and had already spent 4 years there, learning the rhythm of a busy restaurant while dreaming about something bigger. Food was not just a job to her. It was the plan. She wanted a culinary degree. She wanted to build a life around something she loved. When Chelsea was not working, she filled her time with the things that made her feel like herself. She listened to musical soundtracks, played video games, read, baked, and stayed close to her friends. She had the kind of everyday life that feels ordinary while it is happening and priceless once it is gone. That is often how these stories begin. Not with danger. Not with a warning anyone fully understands. Just a young woman moving through a normal week, expecting more time. On October 26, 2014, that ordinary life crossed paths with a night built for noise and excess. About 15 minutes from Maybe, in Frenchtown Township, Mike Williams was preparing for his annual Halloween party. Calling it a party barely covered it. Bands played on the property. Fire breathers performed. A huge bonfire burned into the night. Alcohol moved freely. Drugs did too. Security guards and parking attendants had been hired to manage the crowd, but the crowd kept growing anyway. More than 600 people would come and go before the night was over. In a place like that, it is easy to believe visibility equals safety. Most people do. A large crowd feels like protection. Sometimes it is the perfect cover. Chelsea went to the party with her best friend Rebecca. She had spent real time on her costume, a homemade poison ivy look with black fitted pants, a leaf-covered top, a long purple wig, and a bottle marked poison that reportedly held cheap wine. Around 1:30 that morning, a photo captured her in the middle of it all, smiling brightly, the kind of smile that tells you she expected to remember the night as fun. But what happened after that never settled into one clean version. Some remembered Chelsea drinking heavily. Others remembered her pacing herself. Some thought she looked fine. Others remembered her emotional. By that point, the whole party had started to blur. Masks hid faces. Darkness softened edges. Intoxication scrambled memory. The details were already slipping away while they were still unfolding. At some point during the night, Chelsea walked into a wooden post and cut her forehead. The injury was not life-threatening, but it changed the mood around her. After that, she began asking people for a ride home. Her phone was not with her. She had left it in Rebecca's car because her costume gave her nowhere to keep it. Rebecca went to get it and told Chelsea to stay where she was. She would be right back. It was the kind of small separation no one thinks twice about. A few minutes. One spot in a crowded place. A promise to return. Most people know that feeling of assuming everything will still be exactly where you left it. When Rebecca came back, Chelsea was gone. Another friend who had agreed to drive Chelsea home could not find her either. At first, that did not feel like proof of anything terrible. People were everywhere. Groups formed and broke apart constantly. Cars kept arriving. Cars kept leaving. Chelsea could have found another ride. She could have met someone she knew. She could have headed out with friends and planned to explain it later. That is how hope protects the mind in the first hours. It builds the most harmless version first. By sunrise, the harmless version no longer fit. Chelsea had not come home. Her bedroom was untouched. Her phone was still apart from her. The party she had attended was not within easy walking distance of her house. Her home was about 8 miles away, beyond long winding rural roads and wide dark stretches that made a walk back almost unthinkable. If Chelsea had left that party, she almost certainly left in someone's vehicle. Search efforts began at the party property. Daylight exposed what the night had hidden. Bottles and cans were scattered around the ground. The remains of the bonfire were still smoldering. The house looked as wrecked as anyone would expect after hundreds of people had moved through it. The host barely knew who had been there, and that was part of the problem. Chelsea was not one of a few dozen guests in a manageable crowd. She was one face among hundreds. Someone could have spent the entire night near her and still not realized later how important that mattered. The search spread fast. Volunteers moved through tall cornfields. K-9 units tracked scent where they could. Drones lifted over the property. Helicopters scanned the area from above. Fields, ditches, wooded stretches, and roadside shoulders were checked again and again. Yet the same facts kept turning against clarity. Too many costumes. Too many masks. Too much drinking. Too many people sure they remembered something, until their certainty started to crack under the weight of time. One version placed Chelsea outside crying because she was worried about getting home. Another placed her leaving around 3 a.m. with a man wearing a dark hoodie, thick dark-rimmed glasses, and a side fringe haircut. A sketch began circulating through the community, but it described a look common enough to disappear into a crowd. That is one of the most unsettling parts of cases like this. Evil does not always arrive with a face people can describe well. Sometimes it looks ordinary enough to pass without friction. Then the false stories began, and they did what false stories always do. They stole time. One man spun an elaborate account about Chelsea being harassed by 2 men and leaving in their car. It was fiction. Another woman claimed her violent ex had confessed to killing Chelsea. That was fiction too. Both lies turned grief into noise and noise into delay. If you have ever watched a terrible event pull rumor toward it like a magnet, you know how quickly truth can get buried under people needing to be part of the story. Weeks turned into months. The search for Chelsea grew larger, not smaller. A Help Find Chelsea Bruck page gathered more than 12,000 members. More than 1 million leaflets with her face were distributed. The effort reached far beyond Monroe County, beyond Michigan, even beyond the country. Her 23rd birthday passed without her. Her sister's wedding came and went with an empty place where Chelsea should have been. That absence became part of every family event, every meal, every doorway. The family kept living because living does not stop, but nothing in that life stayed whole. Then the first real clue surfaced. A red shoe was found in a field a couple of miles from the party. It belonged to Chelsea. Months later, part of her poison ivy costume was discovered at an industrial site. Time and weather had worn it down, but not enough to erase what mattered. The fabric was torn, and there was blood on it. An unknown male DNA profile was recovered along with Chelsea's blood. For a moment, that discovery seemed like the start of an answer. It also brought an eerie twist. The site was close to where the same man who had invented the harassment story had a family connection. But coincidence does not always mean guilt. His DNA did not match. The true shift in the case came later, and it came with the kind of discovery every family dreads even when they are bracing for it. Construction workers at an abandoned property near old railroad tracks found human remains in a shallow grave. Blonde hair was visible. Chelsea had been taken about 10 miles from the party, left naked, and covered with branches in a wooded area. The hope that she might still be alive ended there. Her injuries changed the shape of the case. Chelsea had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The damage to her face was severe. Her nose was broken. Her jaw was broken. Her eye sockets were broken. 2 teeth were chipped. The force behind those injuries was too great to be explained away by one accidental strike from a hand in a chaotic moment. Suddenly, the story narrowed. This was not just disappearance. Not just concealment. It was violence that had unfolded up close. More than a year passed from the night Chelsea vanished to the point when the case turned toward the man who killed her. During that time, the volume of work behind the scenes was enormous. Roughly 1,000 tips came in. Around 800 interviews were conducted. Dozens of search warrants and subpoenas followed. A new witness or possible person of interest appeared in a grainy image. But the break that mattered most arrived through DNA, almost by chance, after 27-year-old Daniel Clay was arrested in an unrelated theft and had to provide a sample. That sample matched the DNA found on Chelsea's costume. Daniel Clay already carried a long criminal record that included drugs, theft, breaking and entering, assault, and resisting arrest. Around the same period his DNA linked him to Chelsea. Another woman reported that he had attacked and raped her in an apartment just 1 month before the match. The pattern around him was no longer hard to see. He was not a man one bad night had transformed. He was a danger who had been moving through other people's lives long before Chelsea crossed his path. When Daniel was confronted, his story shifted in stages, the way deceptive stories often do. First he denied knowing Chelsea. Then he admitted he had been at the same party. Then he admitted he had been drinking and taking drugs. Then he remembered having sex with a woman in his car, though he insisted it was not Chelsea. Then even that line began to fail. The DNA was on the torn parts of her costume. It was on the wig she had worn. The physical evidence pressed closer than his denials could survive. Eventually Daniel claimed that he had seen Chelsea on the side of the road and offered her a ride home. According to him, that ride turned into a consensual sexual encounter in his car. He said Chelsea wanted rough sex. He said she wanted to be choked. He said he choked her for around 30 seconds and she suddenly stopped breathing. Panic took over. He tried CPR. He could not revive her. He insisted he had not meant to kill her. This is the point in the story where people often split. Some hear accident and feel the pull of uncertainty, because chaos, intoxication, and fear can turn minutes into disaster. Others hear the full condition of Chelsea's body and feel that explanation collapse on contact. When a woman is found with devastating facial injuries, torn clothing, and her body hidden miles away under branches, what does accident really mean? Is it a truth, or is it the last safe word a violent man reaches for when every other lie has failed? Daniel could not explain the damage to Chelsea's face in any believable way. He floated fragments instead. Maybe something happened while moving her. Maybe she struck the car door. Maybe he was too blacked out to remember. But blacked out people rarely forget, only the parts that destroy them most. That contradiction sat at the center of everything. He remembered enough to describe sex. Enough to claim consent. Enough to say he panicked. But not enough to explain how her nose, jaw, and eye sockets were shattered. He admitted driving around with Chelsea's body for 30 to 45 minutes. Then he drove to the area near the railroad tracks, carried her into the woods, and left her there. Later, from jail, he apologized to people close to him and described what happened as an accident. Items connected to Chelsea were also found in his home. He was charged first with second-degree murder, then with concealing a body, and eventually with open murder, allowing the jury to decide what level of homicide the evidence supported. By the time Daniel Clay went on trial in May 2017, nearly 2.5 years had passed since Chelsea vanished from the Halloween party. The case had aged, but the details had not softened. The costume recovered months after her disappearance still told its own story. It was largely intact except for 2 major tears, one at the strap and one at the crotch area. Those tears were not consistent with someone calmly removing clothing. They pointed instead to force, to ripping, to urgency that belonged to one person and not the other. Daniel's DNA was found on the costume and on the wig Chelsea wore that night. The defense tried to keep the case inside one narrow frame. Consensual sex. An accidental death. Panic afterward. But that frame kept cracking. Chelsea's friend did not recognize the picture being painted of Chelsea as someone who sought violent sexual encounters. The condition of her injuries resisted that version too. So did the concealment of her body. The medical findings cut directly against Daniel's account. Chelsea's fatal injuries were overwhelmingly tied to blunt force trauma. The idea that brief choking during consensual sex explained her death did not align with the physical reality of what her body showed. A person can say a death was not intended. That does not make the violence less real. It does not make the tearing of clothing gentler. It does not make the burial less deliberate. Daniel took the stand and maintained that he had not meant for Chelsea to die. He did not deny causing her death. That part had already been established. The question was what kind of killing this had been. Was it a terrible accident born of recklessness and panic, as he wanted the jury to believe, or was Chelsea attacked, sexually assaulted, beaten, and discarded after accepting the wrong ride from the wrong man? Near the emotional center of the trial, that became the debate no one could escape. A lot of people want a case like this to fit into a smaller box. One reckless choice. One tragic mistake. One night gone too far. It is easier to accept than something colder. But the harder view was also the clearer one. Chelsea was vulnerable, stranded, and without her phone. Daniel Clay had the opportunity, the violence in his history, the DNA on her torn costume, and no credible explanation for the damage done to her body. At some point, the common assumption that every horror hides inside confusion has to give way to what the evidence already shows. The jury deliberated for only a few hours. They rejected premeditated first-degree murder, but they convicted Daniel Clay of felony murder in Chelsea Bruck's death and found him guilty of concealing her body. In doing so, they rejected his version of consensual sex turned accidental tragedy. They also rejected the lesser path of manslaughter. The verdict did not erase the years Chelsea's family had lost, and it did not return what had been taken from them on that October night. But it did name the reality more truthfully than the story Daniel tried to sell. At sentencing, Chelsea's mother wore purple, Chelsea's favorite color. She offered Daniel forgiveness, not because the harm was small, not because forgetting was possible, but because carrying hatred forever would only keep breaking what was already broken. She handed him a Bible. It was one of the quietest and most difficult moments in the entire case. Some people hear that and see strength. Others hear it and feel the weight of a mother forced to find peace in a world that gave her none. Both reactions make sense. She also left behind a lesson that landed with unusual force. If you go somewhere with your friends, leave with your friends. Do not assume someone else will make sure they are safe. Do not let the crowd trick you into thinking your person cannot disappear inside it. That warning lingered because it reached past Chelsea's case. It touched something universal. The casual parting at the end of a night out. The easy confidence that everyone will text when they get home. The belief that a few minutes apart cannot change a life. You may hear that and think it is obvious. Most truths only become obvious after they have already cost someone everything. Daniel Clay was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for Chelsea's murder. In the separate sexual assault case involving the other woman, he later received an additional sentence of 40 to 75 years. He appealed the murder conviction, but the sentence stood. Chelsea's future did not disappear with her. It survived in a smaller, sadder form through a scholarship created in her name for culinary arts students at the community college she should have attended. That detail hurts in a particular way because it keeps both versions of her life visible at once. The one that happened, and the one that was waiting. A Halloween party ended. Cars pulled away. Costumes came off. Hangovers faded. Stories from the night were retold in pieces and laughter and disbelief. But Chelsea Bruck never got to join in the next morning. She was only trying to get home. That was the simple human need at the center of everything. Not adventure. Not danger. Not a reckless plan. Just the ordinary hope of getting out of the dark and back to the people who loved her. Maybe that is why this case stays with people. It strips away the distance we like to keep between our lives and someone else's tragedy. A rural road. A missed ride. A dead phone. A face in a crowd that feels familiar enough to trust. Nothing about that sounds impossible. Nothing about it belongs only to other people. And long after the verdict, long after the headlines faded, that is what remains. A small Michigan town. A family still half expecting Chelsea to walk through the back door. A dream of culinary school that had to be carried forward by strangers. And a single night in costume, noise, and make-believe that ended by revealing something far more ordinary and far more frightening than a monster in a mask.